Have you ever wondered what it feels like when the person you trusted most leaves behind nothing but a single note? And in that note lies a truth so devastating it can destroy everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and marriage. I want you to stay with me because in the next few minutes you are going to hear a story that is not just about wealth, not just about luxury, not just about the glamorous life of a billionaire CEO, but about the kind of heartbreak that money can never protect you from. You clicked on this video because the title itself pulled you in, and I promise you by the end of this story you will understand why this note mattered, what secret it carried, and why a man who seemed to have everything suddenly felt like he had nothing at all. This isn't just entertainment, this is a journey, and you are going to be right there in the middle of it. So don't skip, don't move away, because what's coming will stay with you for a long time. Let's set the stage. Imagine a man who has everything society tells us we should dream of. Power, status, cars that cost more than most houses, a mansion overlooking the city skyline, and a face that every magazine has called the ideal billionaire husband. His name is Alexander Reed, a man who built his empire from nothing, who rose to become the kind of CEO everyone in Wall Street watches, admires, and sometimes even fears. He's the kind of man who looks like he never loses. But let me ask you something. What good is a billion-dollar empire when the person you wake up next to, the person you love, leaves behind a message that rips the ground right out from under you? This is not just about wealth. This is about the kind of betrayal that makes you question whether you ever really knew the person lying beside you. And here's where I need you to lean in and listen closely, because if you've ever been in love, if you've ever trusted someone with your heart, then this story is going to feel personal. You might find yourself thinking about your own relationships, the things people say to you, and the things they don't say. We're about to step into a world where silence speaks louder than words, and where one note, a simple folded piece of paper, turns a marriage upside down. You clicked this video because you wanted answers, and I'm telling you right now, if you stay until the very end, you're going to get them. But along the way, you're also going to feel the suspense, the drama, and the twist that no one saw coming. Now let me take you into the atmosphere. It was late at night, the kind of night where the city outside sparkled with neon lights, but inside the mansion everything felt eerily quiet. Alexander came home after a day of boardroom battles, handshakes, and signing contracts worth millions. He loosened his tie, expecting to find his wife, Isabella, waiting with the kind of warmth that money couldn't buy. She was the woman he thought was his anchor, his reason to breathe when the corporate storms became too heavy. But tonight was different. The air was still, the lights dim, and something inside him immediately sensed that the world he knew was about to change. You've felt that before, haven't you? That sinking feeling in your stomach when something is wrong, but you can't quite put it into words yet. That's exactly what Alexander felt when he stepped into the empty living room, and then he saw it, a note. Not left carelessly, not hidden, but placed deliberately on the marble counter in their kitchen, where he couldn't possibly miss it. His heart skipped because we all know that a note, when left in silence, carries more weight than 1,000 conversations. Think about IT people write notes when they can't face you, when they can't bring themselves to speak the words out loud. And here's the twist, this wasn't just any note. This was a note that shattered him, a note that made him question everything, a note that would make even a billionaire drop to his knees. But I'm not going to tell you what was written just yet, because that's the mystery that's going to hold you right here, watching and waiting. You're going to discover it the same way Alexander does, piece by piece, moment by moment. And I know you're curious right now, your mind is already racing, wondering what could a wife possibly write that would break a man who has everything? Could it be betrayal? Could it be a confession? Or could it be something far darker, something that money, power, or influence can't fix? Stay with me, because that's exactly where this story is headed. Now let's talk about Isabella. To the world, she was the perfect billionaire's wife, elegant, poised, a woman who seemed to live a fairy tale life filled with designer gowns, charity galas, and vacations on private islands. But behind closed doors, Isabella was more complicated than anyone realized. She had secrets, emotions she buried deep beneath her flawless smile, and a quiet ache that Alexander had overlooked while chasing his empire. And that's where so many relationships fall apart, isn't it? When one person gets so caught up in building a future that they forget the heart standing beside them in the present. If you've ever felt invisible in a relationship, you'll understand Isabella more than you think. And if you've ever been too busy to notice the pain in someone's eyes, you'll understand Alexander's mistake too. So here's what I'm telling you, you cannot miss what happens next. Because that note isn't just words on paper, it's a confession, a goodbye, a key to a secret that changes everything. And when Alexander finally unfolds it, when his eyes scan the lines, his entire world will collapse in front of him. You will hear what that note says, but not yet. Right now, I want you to sit with the same tension he felt, the same knot in the stomach, the same storm in the chest, because when the truth is finally revealed, it's going to hit harder than you can imagine. And let me leave you here, right on this edge, Alexander standing in his cold, silent mansion holding that folded piece of paper, his fingers trembling even though he's the kind of man who never trembles. He doesn't know it yet, but his entire life is about to be rewritten, and so is yours, because once you hear what's inside that note, You'll never forget it." Alexander stood there, the folded paper trembling in his hand, and the silence of the mansion felt heavier than any noise could have. He had faced shareholders ready to tear him apart, enemies on Wall Street, waiting for him to stumble in boardrooms, where every word he spoke could shift millions of dollars. But nothing in those high-stakes battles had ever made his chest tighten like this. His hand brushed against the cool marble of the counter, grounding himself, as though touching something solid might stop the storm swirling inside. He didn't unfold the note yet, not because he wasn't desperate to know, but because something deep in his gut warned him that once he read it, nothing would ever be the same. And that fear of the unknown was far worse than anything he had ever experienced in business. The mansion around him told its own story, one of wealth and power, but also of emptiness. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, the marble floors shone like mirrors, and the grand piano in the corner sat untouched, its keys gathering dust. Everything looked perfect, as if staged for a magazine shoot, but the silence revealed the truth. Money could buy every material luxury, but it couldn't fill the spaces between two people when love began to slip away. Alexander remembered the last dinner they had together just a week ago. Isabella had worn a crimson gown that hugged her figure like it was designed for her alone. She had smiled, but it wasn't the smile that reached her eyes. He should have noticed. He should have asked. But he had been too focused on a merger deal, too consumed with the endless grind of expanding his empire. And now, staring at the note, he wondered if that had been his first real mistake the moment he chose ambition over intimacy. But there was more here than just a marriage and silence. Isabella herself had layers no one could easily understand. She was not simply the trophy wife people whispered about in gossip columns. Before marrying Alexander, she had a life of her own, one filled with quiet resilience. Born into a modest family, Isabella had worked tirelessly to build a name for herself in the world of art. She had dreams of opening her own gallery one day, and Alexander had once promised her that he would support that dream. But somewhere along the way, promises had turned into forgotten conversations, and forgotten conversations had turned into disappointment. To the outside world, she lived in diamond necklaces and designer gowns. But deep inside, she carried the ache of someone who feared she had lost herself to the role of being Mrs. Alexander Reed. And sometimes, when a woman feels like she's fading into the shadow of someone else's success, she makes choices she never thought she would. As Alexander held that note, his mind began to race with questions. Was this about another man? Was Isabella leaving him for someone who offered her the affection he had failed to give? Or was it something far deeper, something tied to a secret he couldn't possibly predict? You see, in marriages like theirs, betrayal doesn't always come in the form of another lover. Sometimes it comes in the form of hidden truths, the kind that shatter trust more than any affair ever could. And if you've ever been in love, you know the truth hurts more than lies, because it forces you to question every moment that came before it. The house seemed to echo with memories that night. The walls remembered their arguments, the ones muffled behind closed doors where Alexander's raised voice clashed with Isabella's tears. The staircase remembered the nights she walked down in silence, dressed beautifully for events she didn't want to attend, her heels clicking like a metronome counting down the moments of her unhappiness. Even the bedroom, with its soft sheets and grand canopy, held onto the distance that had grown between them. The nights when they slept back to back, their silence speaking louder than any fight ever could. All of it led to this moment, this note, and though Alexander hadn't read it yet, it already carried the weight of years of choices, neglect, and emotions unspoken. But here's where the story takes another turn, one that you won't expect, because Alexander wasn't the only one who would be affected by this note. There were others watching from the shadows, people who had been waiting for cracks to appear in his perfect empire. In the high-rise offices of his competitors, rumors were already swirling that his marriage wasn't as perfect as the tabloids made it seem, and in the quiet corners of the city, a woman from Alexander's past had started to resurface, carrying secrets of her own. Subplots were weaving themselves into this narrative, threads that would soon collide in ways Alexander couldn't imagine. And as you're listening now, you need to remember this: every powerful man has enemies, but sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who knows his heart. Meanwhile, Isabella's story was unfolding from her perspective too. Earlier that day, before leaving the note behind, she had walked through the mansion one last time. She ran her fingers along the shelves filled with awards, books, and artifacts Alexander had collected from his travels. To her, each object represented not just his success but also the distance between them. He had brought home treasures from every corner of the world, but rarely did he bring home time for her. She stood at the window, staring out at the city lights, wondering if anyone would ever know how lonely it felt to live in a house filled with everything except understanding. Writing the note had not been easy for her. She had hesitated, her hand shaking as she put pen to paper. Every word she wrote carried a piece of her heart, a truth she had buried for years, and when she finally folded the paper and placed it on the counter, she knew she was walking away not just from Alexander but from the version of herself she no longer recognized. The suspense only deepened because Isabella wasn't running without reason. She was hiding something that connected not just to her own unhappiness, but to a part of Alexander's past he thought was long buried. The note was more than a goodbye. It was a revelation. And though Alexander didn't know it yet, that revelation would ripple through every part of his life, his business, his reputation, his friendships, even his family ties. Secrets this deep don't just stay between two people. They explode outward, pulling others into the storm. And here's where I need you, the viewer, to really think. If the person you love the most left behind a note that carried a truth so powerful it could destroy you, would you want to read it? Or would you rather remain in the comfort of not knowing? That's the kind of question Alexander was facing in that moment. His fingers pressing against the folded edges, his breath uneven, his world hanging in the balance. You're going to find out what he decides, but not yet, because for now we are just pulling deeper into the web, into the shadows where more mysteries are waiting. In another corner of the city, a journalist had been digging quietly into Alexander's life, chasing a story that could make headlines. He had heard whispers about the billionaire's perfect marriage not being so perfect after all. His sources hinted that Isabella was not the woman she pretended to be, that there were connections in her past that could tie back to scandals powerful enough to shake the financial world. This subplot was brewing silently, and soon it would collide with the note in Alexander's hand, creating a storm that no amount of money could contain. And as you're hearing this, you already know this story isn't just about love. It's about power, betrayal, and the secrets we keep hidden until the very last moment. Alexander finally took a deep breath, holding the note as though it were alive, as though it carried the power to breathe life or death into his world. He didn't open it yet. He couldn't, not until he was ready. But as the clock ticked past midnight, as the city outside kept moving in its neon glow, his world stood still. And here's where I'm going to leave you again, right on this edge, because the note is still unopened, the truth still waiting. And when it finally unfolds, you will see that this isn't just the story of a broken engagement. It's the story of a man whose empire is about to be shaken by the very person he trusted most. Alexander's hand finally tightened around the folded paper, and as he stared at it in the dim light of his kitchen, he knew he couldn't delay forever. Every second he stood there, the suspense gnawed at him, and the weight of not knowing was becoming unbearable. He unfolded the note slowly, his eyes scanning the first lines, and almost instantly his chest tightened. His jaw clenched, and his entire body froze. Whatever words were written on that paper were not just a simple goodbye, not just the gentle heartbreak of a wife who had grown tired of being unseen. They carried something darker, something far more dangerous. His pulse hammered as he reached the second paragraph, and that's when the world around him seemed to tilt. This was not a farewell letter. This was a warning. Isabella hadn't simply walked out on him. She had left because of something she had discovered, something that could destroy not just their marriage but his entire empire. The note didn't say much, but it said enough to ignite fear in a man who wasn't easily shaken. "They know," she had written, her handwriting slightly jagged as if she'd been rushing. "They know what you tried to bury. They will come for you, and I can't stay here to watch it happen." Those words hit Alexander harder than any betrayal ever could. He reread the line again and again, his mind racing. Who were they? What secret could Isabella possibly be talking about? He was a billionaire CEO, a man whose enemies were countless competitors in business, ruthless rivals who would stop at nothing to see him fall, and even people within his own circle who might want him gone. But the chilling part wasn't the threat. It was the realization that Isabella knew something she wasn't supposed to know. She had uncovered a truth he had locked away so tightly he thought no one would ever find it. His mind flashed back to the early years of his rise. 2 deals made in shadows, 2 partnerships that weren't always clean, 2 moments when ambition had forced him to make choices he never spoke of again. There were things he had done, alliances he had forged, that could ruin him if they ever came to light. He had convinced himself that those ghosts had been buried long ago, but now Isabella's note suggested otherwise. And the fact that she had left meant she wasn't just scared for herself, she was scared for him. This wasn't about love anymore. This was about survival. And for the first time in his life, Alexander felt a crack in the armor he had built so carefully. The unexpected twist wasn't just the note itself, it was the ripple effect it had begun to create. Outside the mansion, the city was already buzzing with whispers. The journalist who had been quietly following Isabella had suddenly stumbled upon a lead that tied her departure to something bigger than a broken marriage. He didn't know the full truth yet, but the note was already making its way into hands it was never meant to reach. A trusted employee of Alexander's, someone he had groomed to be loyal, had overheard enough to piece together fragments of the story. That employee had choices: now stay silent and loyal, or sell information to rivals who would pay millions just to see Alexander Reed's downfall splashed across headlines. The suspense wasn't just inside Alexander's mansion anymore. It was bleeding out into the streets, into boardrooms, into places where enemies waited like sharks circling the scent of blood in the water. Meanwhile, Isabella wasn't gone completely. Her departure wasn't an escape to freedom. It was a retreat into secrecy. She had gone underground, reaching out to someone Alexander hadn't spoken to in years, a figure from his past, whose name alone was enough to send a chill down his spine. And though Alexander didn't know it yet, Isabella was no longer just his wife, she was becoming a player in a much larger game, one that would pit her against him if he dared to confront the truth. That's the danger of secrets. They don't just stay buried. They transform, they grow, and eventually, they turn into weapons. The tension thickened because the people Alexander had dismissed in the past were beginning to resurface. A competitor he had once crushed in a hostile takeover had been waiting patiently for a crack in Alexander's empire. And now, sensing weakness, he began to prepare his move. At the same time, a woman from Alexander's past, a woman who had once known him before he became the ruthless billionaire everyone feared, was quietly re-entering the picture. She held knowledge that tied directly to Isabella's note, knowledge that could unravel the very foundation of his empire if revealed. Subplots were colliding, and though Alexander didn't realize it yet, the storm was no longer on the horizon. It was already inside his house, already shifting the ground beneath his feet. And here's where you, the viewer, need to pay close attention. This isn't just a story about a man finding a note from his wife. This is about betrayal, secrets, and a battle between truth and lies that goes far beyond a broken engagement. What Isabella knew wasn't just personal, it was political, financial, and catastrophic. The note was the spark, but the fire it was about to ignite could burn through everything Alexander had built. Imagine having everything you've ever wanted, power, wealth, influence, only to realize that it could all disappear because of one secret, one person, one piece of paper. That's what Alexander was facing. And you, watching this, are going to discover every layer of it as the story unfolds. Alexander folded the note back up, his fingers trembling not from heartbreak, but from fear, a fear he hadn't felt since his earliest days, clawing his way to the top. He knew he had to find Isabella. He had to know what she had discovered, who they were, and why she had chosen to leave rather than stand beside him. But the cruel truth was that the moment she placed that note on the counter, the game had changed. She was no longer just his wife, she was the keeper of a secret that could destroy him. And the line between ally and enemy was suddenly blurred. And as the clock struck 1 in the morning, Alexander realized he wasn't alone in this fight. The shadows outside were already moving, and someone was watching his every move. And this, right here, is where the stakes climb higher than ever. Because when a billionaire CEO discovers his wife has left not out of betrayal but out of fear for his life, the danger shifts from heartbreak to survival. And as much as you want to know what Alexander does next, I'll leave you hanging here, on the very edge of the twist, because what happens after this moment will change everything, not just for Alexander, not just for Isabella, but for everyone connected to them. Alexander didn't sleep that night. He sat in the leather chair of his study with the note clenched tightly in his hand, replaying every word, every warning, every possible meaning behind Isabella's hurried message. His mind was a battlefield, torn between anger at her for leaving, fear of what she had discovered, and dread over the vague but chilling threat of they. As the first rays of morning light spilled through the tall windows, the billionaire CEO who once stood untouchable in his empire now looked like a man stripped of his armor. For years, he had fought competitors, silenced critics, and expanded his power. But this was different. This wasn't about hostile takeovers or boardroom battles. This was personal. This was about secrets buried so deep he thought no one could ever dig them up. Isabella had not only found them, she had run from them. And now Alexander knew he had no choice but to face the past he had spent his entire career outrunning. By noon, the city was buzzing with whispers. Social media began swirling with rumors that Isabella Red, the glamorous wife of the billionaire, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. A journalist who had been shadowing her for weeks broke the story with a headline that went viral instantly. "Where is Isabella Red? Billionaire's wife leaves behind cryptic note." Trending keywords like broken engagement, billionaire scandal, and mystery note dominated feeds across platforms, and Alexander's empire trembled under the weight of speculation. His PR team begged him to release a statement, his board members demanded answers, and his rivals watched gleefully as his pristine image began to crack. But Alexander ignored them all. None of that mattered now. The only thing that mattered was finding Isabella and uncovering the truth she had risked everything to reveal. The search led him to a place he had sworn never to return to, on the outskirts of the city, hidden behind crumbling warehouses and faded neon signs. There was a club he once owned in his reckless youth, a front for deals that never appeared on paper but paved the road to his empire. Isabella's note hinted at connections that traced back to this very place, and as Alexander stepped inside the dark, smoke-filled room, memories flooded back, memories of men he had crossed, deals he had sealed, and betrayals that had cost others everything. And then he saw her. Isabella sat at a table in the far corner, her face pale but determined, her eyes locking onto his with a mix of fear and defiance. Their reunion wasn't the warm embrace of lovers torn apart. It was tense, heavy, and charged with unspoken truths. "You weren't supposed to come here," she whispered, her voice trembling as if every word was dangerous. Alexander demanded answers, but Isabella shook her head. "It's bigger than us," she said. "The people you buried in your past, the deals you thought no one remembered, they're back. They've been watching us, watching you. I couldn't stay in that house another night knowing what was coming. She slid a folder across the table and inside it were documents, photographs, and evidence proof of deals Alexander had made decades ago, the kind that would not only destroy his empire if exposed, but could put his life at risk. Isabella hadn't betrayed him. She had been protecting him. The climax hit like a storm when the men who had been watching finally made their move. The room filled with shadows as figures emerged, their presence radiating the kind of danger money couldn't erase. They weren't just rivals. They were ghosts from Alexander's past, partners he had once betrayed in his ruthless climb to the top. And now, they wanted revenge. For a moment, the billionaire CEO, who had always seemed untouchable, looked like any other man cornered in the dark. But here's the twist: you would expect Isabella to stand against him, to reveal his secrets as punishment for years of neglect. Instead, she stood beside him. For all her pain, for all the loneliness, she still chose to protect him when it mattered most. In a dramatic confrontation, secrets were dragged into the light, threats exchanged, and Alexander was forced to strike a deal that would cost him power but spare his life. The resolution came not with victory but with sacrifice, to protect Isabella and to ensure their survival. Alexander agreed to relinquish control of certain assets, handing back pieces of his empire he had stolen long ago. The media later spun it as a strategic business move, a billionaire CEO reshuffling his portfolio, but those who were there knew the truth. He wasn't reshuffling, he was paying a debt. And when the dust settled, Alexander and Isabella walked out of that warehouse together, not as the perfect power couple the world once admired, but as two people scarred, humbled, and irrevocably changed. The final unexpected twist came in the aftermath. Weeks later, when life seemed to be returning to a fragile normal, Alexander discovered something Isabella had never told him. Buried in the folds of that original note, hidden beneath the warning, was one last line written so faintly he hadn't seen it before. "I knew the truth long before I wrote this. I stayed because I loved you. I left because I wanted you to see who you really are." Those words hit harder than any scandal, any threat, or any loss of wealth. In the end, it wasn't the rivals or the secrets that broke him. It was the realization that Isabella had loved him enough to risk everything, not just to protect him from his enemies, but to save him from himself. And that is the story you came here for. A broken engagement wasn't about a wedding ring or a marriage certificate. It was about breaking the illusions that blinded them both. A billionaire CEO found a note from his wife, and yes, it shattered him. But in being shattered, he finally saw the truth. And maybe that's the takeaway for all of us watching and listening right now. Money can build empires, power can win battles, but it's the people who see the real you, the flawed, broken you, that hold the power to save or destroy your life. As the video draws to a close, remember this isn't just Alexander's story. It's a reminder to every one of us that no matter how perfect something looks on the outside, the truth inside is always more complicated. And sometimes, the only way to find yourself is to lose everything else first.